Welcome, everybody. I am your host, Steve Schmidt. This is Maker Connect. You are tuning in. Sorry, we've been gone for a while. We've heard that you wanted us back. So we've got Dave Howe today on as a guest. And I think what Dave's going to be able to do is not only wow you with what his company does. I think anything involved in virtual reality and healthcare gets people's ears perked at a minimum. I know it did for my attention. Obviously, Dave, you have a rich history, been at companies such as Notarize, Sissian, certainly, recall that logo from all of my years in sales and all the way back to, you're a young pup compared to me, Dave. You graduated 7 years after I left South Dakota State University. You were at Binghamton University. And so, and you graduated with a dang near 4.0. So you've got a lot of things we could talk about today. I just wanted to highlight the ones that people actually care about. You're really, really smart. You're leading the revenue charge for a VR company in healthcare. How the heck did you get here? Because it sounds like a spot, Dave, a lot of people would want to get to. So welcome to the show, Dave. Thanks for gracing us with your presence.
Wow, well, that's a really generous intro, Steve. Thank you for the intro and for having me. I'm really excited to be on. I love podcasts. I consume them all the time, and I've listened to a few of your episodes as well, and it's been helpful for me too. So thank you for having me. My background, it's been a really circuitous path, which is interesting because I find that to be more common than I think a lot of people expect, that you kind of in your 20s start somewhere and navigate into different types of organizations and industries and eventually find your fit. So how I ended up here at Osso, I've always had a passion for healthcare, and I did take my academics, at least in college, very seriously. Wanted to go to medical school, and actually my first opportunity out of college was at the National Cancer Institute doing clinical research. So a really unusual place to start a career in sales, I like to say. So I had begun kind of doubting if I wanted to have a more clinically focused career, thought that I might want to focus more in business, and I thought I would do well with sales. So I wanted to get started with it, but I didn't really want to close the door on all the hard work and momentum I had in the prior direction. So try to figure out how to bring those two ideas together. I learned about med device sales, and so it was a great opportunity for me to get into a really, I would consider that to be a leading segment as far as a sort of space that you could have a career in sales. And I made that transition, felt that it would strengthen my application for med school if I wanted to go, but also would expose me to sales and if I liked it. And I did it for a few years. I realized I loved it, but I didn't really love med device, which we could talk about if that's interesting. But I decided to make a transition into software and technology. And I was really fortunate because I wasn't intentionally trying to land in that space. A company reached out to me, and I didn't really even know what to think when they asked if I was interested in selling software. Like my genuine immediate reaction was like, what is that? Like, you mean like Microsoft Office? Like, is this a Best Buy? What are we talking about?
The Oregon Trail.
Exactly. I could probably sling a few licenses of the Oregon Trail. That was a fun game. That'd be a fun product to sell. So anyway, I did transition into that role, and it was a big publicly traded tech company. It was Vocus when I joined, and it was called Cision when I left. We had a merger. I learned that I love sales, and then I learned that I love technology. And my director left and went to an earlier stage startup, and I followed him there. And I think that moment was when I really felt like I found my fit. I love sales, I love technology, and I love the early and mid stage startup experience. So that's what I've been doing since then, which has been almost coming up on 10 years now that I've been in startups, early, mid stage, and about 12 years in technology and software altogether. Ended up at Osso is just one of those opportunities that brought like all these different experiences, clinical research, med device, software and technology, early stage startups into one opportunity. And I joined really early as the 12th hire and first hire in terms of sales. And now I've been here for 5 years, and we've grown the company to over 200 people and raised over $100 million in VC funding. So it's been a really wild and rewarding and challenging journey. But that's a little bit about my background and how I ended up here at Osso.
Dave, question for you. How many people do you have in your sales organization at Osso out of the 200 or so employees?
Yeah, so we were upwards of about 20 across. We have enterprise account executives that are net new, like hunting down agreements with new customers. We have the enterprise account management team that focuses on expansion of existing relationships, the sales development for top of the funnel and outbound. And then we have sales operations that evolved into revenue operations. There's 4 teams. We're adding a few headcount, refilling some roles, but our peak, we're about 20 people.
Yeah. So, and that's a lot. I mean, a lot of people are looking at that going, okay, so sales, I get it. Negotiations, right? You've got to get contracts on the line. Well, the other side of that line is the procurement team, is the people that you're trying to sell into. And I want to dig into a little bit about who you're selling into healthcare so we can dig under that umbrella. Who is that end decision maker? Is there that procurement process as a sales leader in VR? I'm assuming in healthcare, there's a lot of paperwork, or maybe I'm wrong. I've been wrong before. There's not a lot of paperwork with AI. So help me walk through that and kind of set the table here for what negotiation even looks like in your present state, Dave.
Yeah, so with what we're doing and selling interactive VR surgical simulations, we're focusing primarily on selling to medical device companies, the sort of like Fortune 1000, like larger sized organizations like Johnson and Johnson and Boston Scientific. In terms of the negotiation and working those opportunities, there's for sure procurement. It's one of the challenges and where I think negotiation becomes really important as you get in more enterprise opportunities and less of like smaller transactional deals is, we are working with such a broad set of stakeholders in terms of the business owners and the people that are utilizing and needing to derive the business value from the technology. There are multiple ICPs like medical education, marketing, sales training, sales as well for like using our technology for product demos and sales enablement. But then that's like kind of working the deal, building the momentum, getting the verbal, the business sees the value, has the budget, wants to move forward. And then from there, you're going to go into speaking with procurement, as well as typically some kind of technical review, like security, data privacy, things of that nature, legal terms and conditions, intellectual property indemnification, like all really big topics. So yeah, I think every deal that we have will, at the close of it, have negotiations with anywhere from like 4 to 8 different groups. And sometimes those groups can be multiple people. And everyone cares about something different.
Yeah, well, and if I understand med device like I do, a lot of these companies maybe have been giant merger and acquisition companies, and they're very much regionalized. And so, although the Northeast may love your device, the Southwest says, I don't want to see it. My friend Johnny or Jessica over here has a great device. Stay out of here. And you're like, man, we want to win the whole account. We can get better pricing. Now I really need to get buy-in, not just top down. It's really a different kind of sale. And I always tell everybody, if you haven't done that sale before, I used to sell wireless. And to federal government and local government, same thing, right? Well, the State Department over here loves you. This one says do not enter. And so you'd really have to sort of pile your way up. And soon you look back pretty soon and you go, man, we have 62% of the business.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is that a similar style to where you almost need that buy-in before you really make the big enterprise case? Or are you usually seeing the deal start with, we're very interested in scaling this out across our entire operation?
You see both, but I think most commonly people will, especially with what we do as a really cutting edge, innovative technology that's a new category, people aren't experienced with it. In this moment in time, the economy is difficult, budgets are tighter. So we probably see more often, for sure companies like a J&J are not coming in and saying, hey, we want to do VR across all of our divisions for all of our products. It typically does start slow and scale from there. I think the growth, because a lot of our growth comes from expansion of existing accounts. So it is just getting the flag planted and getting the logo acquired as being really critical before I start to worry too much about the people that are in the day-to-day, like say the end users, as opposed to the decision makers and influencers for the relationship.
Yeah.
But I think that does become really critical because the utilization of the product is what will drive demand for more growth. So you can get the relationship, you can get the foot in the door and the product in the door, but then to continue to maintain the business and grow it, you need to make people really passionate, using it regularly, telling their friends. And so I do think that's important, but typically more for us, at least, an expansion of existing accounts than with landing new accounts.
Understood. Okay. So this all started somewhere. Did you always take negotiations seriously? I mean, you definitely took your GPA seriously and school seriously. My guess is yes. Or was it this thing that somewhere in your career, the light bulb went off and you said, this is important to me?
Yeah. I think it was a slow process for me. I don't think there was like really a specific moment that I noticed it was becoming really critical. I think it becomes more important on the enterprise side. So, probably as I matured in my career and started moving into bigger, more complex organizations and deals, I started to see the value and importance of it. And it actually is like an interesting topic because I feel like when you start in sales and when you talk with someone that isn't in sales about what's important in sales, there are a lot of misaligned expectations. Like, if you were to ask someone that doesn't do sales, what's the most important part? They're probably going to think about what we see in the movies and like someone in front of a boardroom and the slick talker, backslapper, just like working the room and like giving this hardcore pitch that's just moving everybody. But like for me, actually, when I'm hiring people and thinking about talent and what's important to me, yeah, that obviously is critical. You got to build excitement, and that's like the hook. But I find that a lot of people can do that well. I find the more like challenging part of the sale is the closing of the deal and the end of the process, and that's where you really start to find obstacles that are coming out of the woodwork and obstacles that are hidden that no one is telling you about, and different stakeholders that you may or may not be aware of that you need to uncover. And there's just like a lot of moving pieces as you try to get that last mile. So probably as I moved into enterprise and as I started hiring and really scaling the team to where we are today and thinking about everything we've learned in my career, I do think that those were probably moments where I really started to see the value in it.
Yeah. I think it's difficult. Someone once told me until you own a business, they said, you don't appreciate the power of negotiation because really the effect is treat it like it's your own dollar. And I said, that's easy to say. Pretty hard for me to do. At the time I was working for T-Mobile, very large Fortune, 100 company. And we would have to negotiate deals often, and hardware, software, deal bundles, right? So that's where I really learned the art of bundling. And so talk to me a little bit about that, because I think that some people look at that as a little bit of the mystery. But I want to peel back the curtain and just say, not really. We're just saying this is everything. But if you don't want everything and we've sold the value on everything and aligned it to meet your needs, we also can disassemble the deal. Now, with that comes all sorts of interesting next steps, right? Because it could disassemble the deal to this is no longer a solution. This is no longer profitable for us to do this. And I think that's where a lot of people look at bundles and go, what do you mean? And they don't really understand as sales reps the art of that. Talk me through that, Dave, specifically in your line of work. And then we're going to talk about the movies a little bit because you mentioned it earlier with sales. We're going to talk about negotiation, the movies after that, because I think it goes really well into called the idea of bundling. So, Dave, how do you teach bundling today? How do you ethically talk about bundling? Because it's a strategy I think is very effective if done ethically.
It just is very like intuitive and makes sense as a strategy in a lot of cases. In terms of like influencing someone to buy something, I always say like you're not going to make any progress with a buyer until they know that they're hurt. Like you need to understand their worldview. They need to know that you understand it. And part of that is making sure that your offerings can be aligned and tailored to like their needs. So that concept of tailoring is really important. And so bundling in the opportunity to flex the package as far as the different products, as well as the cost, allows you to sort of fit that solution into their needs and their budget, which will make it feel more like it's a reasonable solution that's like designed for someone like them. I think also bundling can be really important. Obviously, salespeople are always looking to like grow their deals and sell more. And so if you can have like the core product and value driver that sort of like underlies the partnership and why they're doing this, but then you can have additional add-ons that are like noticeably more affordable that might be nice to haves. They can get the core thing they need and get maybe some things that they're ultimately excited about as well. And then for us, we have the licensing of our software. We have really robust content development for building these bespoke surgical simulations. And then because it's such a new and innovative technology, we have to be really creative with how we support the relationship and make sure it's being utilized and driving business value. So there are three huge categories of topics that we sell, and each one is kind of unique. Like it is, we are a technology and SaaS company, but we're also kind of like a content studio. And we're also kind of like a consultancy. So we have like multiple products in each of those categories that can be bundled. I think the other piece, you want to grow the deal, but sometimes people don't know what they need. Like sometimes people are like, oh, yeah, I just need this many licenses and I don't need that support. And I'm like, well, I've worked with 10 people that look just like you that had all the same assumptions of you. And if you don't get these licenses and you don't get that support, I know you're not going to get the utilization, you're not going to see the outcome, and you're probably not going to grow and you might not even renew. So you want to like also use that to be able to make sure that they're getting what they need, even if they don't think they need it.
Yeah. I like that answer a lot because, salespeople get a bad rap. And I think those salespeople who take it upon themselves to be of service and to inform and to educate, marketing's job, right, is awareness, conversion. Like everybody has a place. And if we do the thing we're hired to, which is safely guide them home to the destination, and then it makes a lot of sense. It's when we try and do it and it doesn't fit that it feels bad to everybody, right? And that's where we kind of look and go, should we even do this deal? Like, why are we doing this deal? And especially in a more mature company where bad deals can kill a company pretty quickly. I want to talk about backing it out to something that everybody can relate to. The movies. There's scenes that we have. I mean, I've had a lot of people talk about, like, for example, the movie Wolf of Wall Street with sales, and they say it's their favorite movie. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's a good movie, great movie. It's not how I sell. It's not how anybody who taught me how to sell. I mean, those things don't exist in my world. And I've seen a lot of sales rooms, right? Versions of that, sure, but it makes it look a lot more grandiose than it truly is. My question to you, Dave, is the movies, negotiation, we see hostage stuff. We hear Chris Voss using that, right? I trained hostage negotiations. Trust me, I can train your sales team. Well, the reality of it is, although there are many things that carry over in negotiations in the movies, many don't. Talk to me about that. Real life versus the movies, people's perception versus reality. What would your feedback on that be that you've learned thus far in your young career, Dave?
Thank you for saying my young career. I don't always think that way myself.
Well, I'm old compared to you, man. So you're younger than me. So we'll just leave off the ER.
There we go. I mean, there are some obvious things, I think, like I'm not aware of anyone being taken hostage in any of my negotiations. I think in the movies, a lot of times there's like just really clear winners and losers. And I think it's like typically more nuanced, and the stakes typically aren't like as life or death or dramatic as what you would see in the movies. I think the more interesting thing, though, in terms of like perception versus reality on this topic is, and we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, in the movies, I feel they really focus on the verbal exchange and they focus on the at the table part of like the process, and I don't think that that's the execution of the negotiation. But again, I don't think that's the most critical part. And I think they miss a lot of like the creativity and planning and research and back channeling and preparation and competitive research and all those types of things that will be taking place behind the scenes. So I think that there are some like obvious kind of comical differences and some things we could probably make fun of Hollywood for. And then, maybe some more nuanced things as well. I will say, I don't know. Did you see the movie Air by chance recently?
I'm
With
not.
Michael Jordan. It's was known as like a Michael Jordan documentary, but it's actually about Nike, the founding of Nike, and the partnership with Michael Jordan.
Okay.
It's a great movie. It came out this past summer. I really recommend it. But it's actually an exception to this, where they show some of the planning and like discussion and research, and it's kind of like they do it in a way that's pretty accurate and real and comical. I won't get into details, so I don't have any spoilers, but I would just throw that in there. I would recommend for you and your audience to check that out if you haven't seen it. It was really great.
Very cool. The movie Air. Well, I've seen the Michael Jordan documentary that I really liked. Grew up watching WGN, like a lot of kids in the Midwest. Like it was the only channel we had outside of the local, and we were gifted because we got Michael Jordan on our TV like 2 or 3 nights a week. And then Nike, and just even we hear these copious amounts of money with players, and I caught myself the other day because of business going. Someone said, "Oh, this new quarterback signed for $55 million a year." I think it was Joe Burrow out of Cincinnati, and I was like, I don't make a ton of money. And I said, that's not that much money. Because I mean, it's so much money, right? But you also think about it like the negotiations that go into professional athletes, and now you have athletes negotiating for themselves, and these things where, yeah, sure, if you have an agent, sure, you're giving up a commission to that, and you've got to pay all those people around you, then it's not a lot of money. And so I don't blame those athletes who are holding out in negotiation, because I can see very quickly how it's the rest of their life, because a lot of them after football are planning for the years after football because there isn't something guaranteed for them afterwards. And I think that's what we forget as fans and fantasy football fans, that, yeah, I think given the viewership, the pay is warranted. It's just like, it's kind of like the value in a product, right? If you don't have the value and you ask for a $110,000 contract, you're going to get laughed out of the room. If you have a contract that it comes in, it's aligned to the expectations, which is not, to your point, the Hollywood slide the contract and kind of look at them. I feel like right now, a lot of people, not so much in the enterprise, are being very transparent about price, even in the enterprise, or at least wanting to talk about it on their website. So you don't have to go, man, this Dave's company looks great. I could never afford that. We're not even going to talk to them because that's not something we could feasibly even pay for if we negotiated great. So that's real life. And then there's the nuance, which you mentioned. So let's wind it down. We have a couple more questions for you. I like this one the best because there is no right answer. Negotiations, is it more of an art, Dave, or more of a science?
I think, it's both. It really depends on the situation. I do think like there's a general trend toward it becoming more of a science than an art. But to kind of define, I guess, before I even talk about that, I think of the art as like the sort of human element and like the creative side and like understanding the motivations and building a rapport and having a relationship and trust. And then I think of like the science as sort of the analytical, the numbers, the business case, and so forth. And I think one of the interesting trends that I've seen in my last, 15 years or so doing sales, there's like a move away from relationships and into like a higher velocity, challenger oriented sort of mindset where you're not trying to be best friends with everyone or send them holiday cards. You're like ruthlessly efficient and you're challenging their assumptions and you're trying to move deals quickly and move on to the next one. And that kind of makes me sad. I feel like people are missing a huge opportunity that like we are human and relationships still matter at the end of the day. But like I think every negotiation is different and a lot of people are talking less about the art and less about relationships, but it's definitely both. And I have a good example of the art and like the importance of the negotiation and motivations and so forth. I'm happy to share with you if you're
Please
curious
do.
to
Yeah.
hear it.
Love story time.
Yeah, so like this was probably, I mean, this would easily stand out. And I was thinking and preparing a little bit over the weekend and figure like, well, some example at some point is probably gonna be helpful. This is one of my favorite ones. I'll just not mention the company or specifics or what company I was at the time, but it was interesting. We had a customer that was one of our first customers to join at the company I was working for. And then they ended up changing gears and they moved over to a competitor of ours. And then they stayed with that company for several years and they did a lot of work with them. And they basically had a lot of sunk costs with them that were going to make it really difficult, even just like from a political perspective, for them to ever move away from that vendor. And part of the issue was like we were, as I like to work in early mid-stage companies, the market that we were in wasn't mature yet. It was not really clear who the leader was, and they made this decision. Uh, I thought we were the leader at the time. Maybe I'm biased, but for sure it became more clear over time that we did end up winning that race, and we had almost all of their competitors working with us, and they were just working with the other company. And we meet with them periodically, and I could just tell like we obviously really wanted to work with them, and I could tell this guy like underneath it all really wanted to work with us, but he was one of the integral people that got them to move away and then spend all this money, and they're going to lose that. And then also he was really loyal to the other company, and I was worried that if we go in and really try to resell them all of our innovation, which happens very fast in technology, you do want to protect your IP, especially the early stage being leaked and shared with our competition. So I'm like, sitting here in one conversation, listening to all the amazing things we're doing, him sharing things he wants to do. Feel like we want to work with him. He wants to work with us, but there's this big like obstacle. It's really just a political dynamic, probably at the end of the day. And so I just kind of like had one of those like shoot your shot moments with him at the end of the call. It was like we would do these every 6 months or a year, and we'd tell him all this amazing stuff, and he'd say some nice things, and then nothing would happen. And I said, hey, Steve, I wanted to ask you, like, just sort of lay out the situation, like, just transparently. This is how I feel. This is what I feel like I'm seeing here is that you guys made this decision, like, the market matured. We came out ahead. I think you see that. I know we want to work with you. I think you want to work with us. But there's all these other people that would be probably upset about the decision to move away and then come back and all the money you spent in the meantime. Right. So I said also, to be fully transparent, we know you work with them. So if we go do all this effort and we don't move forward, I'm worried that you or people that are a part of the evaluation will go share our IP and that whatever. So I said, look, I just like, I had this thought I wanted to mention to you. Like, I think that this would be really important for us to win this deal. I think at the end of this process, we probably try to get really flexible with you on pricing and absorb as much as we could of those costs that you spend and built that into like a bigger deal with us and a longer term deal where we know we can recoup some of that money over time. And I think you're going to be laughed out of the room if you go just say, hey, I want to meet with Osso and talk about moving back to them after you already did the opposite. And it probably won't make you look good. So I'm trying to figure out, though, at the end of the day, it's still reality that I want to work with you. I think you want to work with me. How do we make this happen? And so I thought about it. I said, what if like we go to our brainstorm table, we come back to you, and we just proactively lead. Here's an offer of like, our pricing. It's been in front of you before you were a customer. We're going to offer you like some discount if you make the change. When you go to your counterparts and you talk about re-engaging with us, you can tell them, I've already negotiated if we do this, we do have to do a longer term and a bigger commitment, but they are going to credit us this much money. You're going to look like a hero. There's no risk in that for you. And all I want to know is that I'm going to get one shot with all the right people in the room, and you bring their technology and we bring ours, and you let people demo it head to head and let us present. And I think it's going to be a no-brainer. And he loved the idea. We had a few meetings, planned it out, set up a meeting 2.5 months later, and we had this huge conversion. But it was really all around, like, I mean, truly, I actually looked up just out of curiosity. I feel like negotiation can be like a little bit of a dirty word. I'm like, what does it actually even mean? Like, just at the end of the day, what is negotiation? I looked it up. It said, negotiation is the process of coming to a mutual decision, a mutually like desirable outcome, right? And that to me is the clearest example of a negotiation, like identifying that we both want the same thing, but what are the things in the way and how do we creatively remove it? And that was using the art. And I do find I typically negotiate more commonly on the science, and that's typically where you win the deals. But the art is important, and it's about building trust and knowing the motivations and being creative with how you work through that process with someone.
Yeah, I mean, the definition's beautiful. When we don't get what we want, though, or when we fear loss, a lot of times, I mean, that's to me like the tipping points of we all intend to be civil in a negotiation. I think we all also intend to get what we want. And you brought up a really interesting point regarding when we talked about the movies where it doesn't quite work that way. There isn't always a clear-cut winner. And where we look at real life, let's say a hardware company, software company, they get the deal versus really work the deal that they're going to get anyways. And this is a conversation I've had a lot here with revenue leaders is sort of like, when do you as a revenue leader coach your team and say, that's the deal? Or when do you say, no, we're not discounting X percent because we just don't need to? Because at the end of the day, usually if you're like other managers, like I'm the rep, when I was a rep, at least I did not want to be told how much to discount. Now I was told a lot. Because as a salesperson, you sort of feel this need, or at least I did, to sort of pre-sell it to the customer before I get pricing. If I can get this pricing, you go back and they'd say, no way in hell. I'd say, what? And, we had a whole pricing team at T-Mobile. So like they were the untouchable people that didn't have email addresses or phone numbers. So we just emailed a box and then we get a Salesforce back, accepted or rejected. We'd be like, dang it. But they knew they were looking after the profitability of the book of business for the entire month, right? So they were viewing it differently than I was viewing it. I didn't get it because I also didn't care. And so it's interesting to think of the shavings make a pile, but Dave, I would assume in your business there's a lot of similarity, right? Where you have to be very acutely aware of the level of discounting and how it's affecting the run rate for a period of time versus that individual unit. Is that a correct assumption in how you look at that revenue liability, if you will?
Yeah, I don't worry about like discounting too much because I just try to put some swim lanes and things in place. And like part of it's because I also think fairness and consistency is really important. So I'm not going to like do anything that's really outside the box that could jeopardize other contracts and relationships. So in my mind, I think like I try to think about, first of all, if we are actually discounting, I'll typically try to have some band that like reps can negotiate up to X and then up to Y requires approval. But I also try to get them to pivot back into like value. Anytime we're talking about price, got to talk about value and like what are the things we could do to keep the deal the same size, but add in like additional functionality or services or content that will provide business value for them and not take money off the table for us. And I think knowing kind of like where you are in your year, like for us being enterprise, we don't have high volumes of deals. We have small volume in terms of number of deals, but they're really big. And so like if discounting's coming up, I'm like trying to size up the rest of my pipeline and where I'm at in the year and how bad do I need this and all those types of things. But yeah, I think like generally though, trying to pivot away from, savings and discounting and into adding functionality and then just reminding that like in most instances, it's not discounting does not win deals.
Yeah.
Like really
And they don't
never
go
does.
good if you do, right? I mean, it's one of those things where it's always the nightmare.
Yeah. If you're really reliant on it, you're probably not going to win the deal. And it probably reflects that you were lacking in your delivery of the value proposition and business value. And most commonly, you probably were doing that okay, but you were talking to the wrong person, is typically the issue there.
And you've got a really good handle on this stuff, Dave. But let's pivot away from you. I bet you there's a lot of people out there who have at least heard of this concept of AI in negotiations on procurement. On your side, take all the emotion out, right? Let the bots do their work. There's an article we shared out earlier this year. Walmart uses AI in its negotiations. Walmart's almost infamous. Not almost, pardon me. Also infamous for its 2-week blackout period. And I think some companies have adopted that, right? At any given time, we're going to go dark on vendors because they panic. And it's strategically going to be forecasted on what we're going to save that month on, call it vendor negotiations on discounting almost, I think it was twice their normal threshold. And so it was almost admirable. And you felt a little sick at the same time because it was so good. And now there was a lot of vendors who are saying, I don't like negotiating with bots, but that's what we have to do now. Now in our world, call it your world, healthcare, selling to other healthcare device manufacturers, there's a lot of tech there. Are they implementing or have you seen AI bots involved in your negotiations today, Dave?
No, I haven't seen anything as far as I'm aware in terms of like, the actual communication and so forth. I mean, I don't know what people are doing on the back end of like behind closed doors and their planning and preparation. I feel like we can't have a professional like business conversation without AI coming up today. It's like
Yeah.
what everyone's talking about. So I've thought about it a lot too. And I generally think, first of all, like there's a lot of fear around it, and I don't think the fear is warranted. I think that there will be a huge shift in the economy. I think there will be like people that suffer and industries that change and careers that need to be redirected, and that's a story as old as time. The cars put the horse and buggy out of business and the internet put the brick and mortar out of business and society finds a way to go on and you have to evolve and keep pace with the economy and the dynamics of whatever space you're in. And in most cases, all the technology tends to do, you look at different like big innovations, they make our lives easier and they like probably take away aspects of our job that we didn't really even like that much in the first place. So I feel like technology, just like no one can predict it. Even when you think about the iPhone, is maybe like in mobile being the last major technological shift. No one could have guessed like the way that these phones would be interacting with, you know, our society and individuals back in 2007 when they were launching. We don't know about AI either, taking jobs and doing our negotiations for us. I do think people, if they're smart, are already using it. I use it very regularly, but I use it a lot for research. So helping myself with preparation, gathering, analyzing information, data about the prospect, about the competition, the market trends, dynamics, what's important to people. I don't do this as much yet, but I've been kind of experimenting with data analysis with AI and like parsing and understanding trends. I think that will be a big thing. And yeah, maybe one day, there'll be like a couple of bots that, take my job and negotiate back and forth with each other. But I just don't see that. I don't try to think about it too much. I just think like at the end of the day, there will probably be fewer people in sales because a lot of what we'll need to do will be automated. But also, you could just argue it's going to make everyone more productive. And why not keep a similar headcount and just let everyone sell more? Just all that means is the business can have more productivity out of the existing people. If the people are if the business is making sense, those reps should be profitable, and you should just want to hire more, but you typically can't because you don't have the funding to be able to do so. So I think there's a lot of like interesting opportunities people can already use it for preparation. I would say though, like, do not, especially if you don't know the topic well, use it as like a source of truth. I find it's most helpful on topics that I'm already very knowledgeable about, but maybe have a little gap and can like suss if it's actually accurate or not. But because I found a lot of things on there, I'm like, that's not true, or that's not what my take would be on that. So I think it's less mature of a technology than most people think. It's very impressive. It's like eerie and compelling and fun to talk about, but I think it's going to take a long time to get it to where people see it going. And I think the impact will be more nuanced and less painful than everyone's worried about.
It's a very interesting take. In a world of writing, right, which is a lot of my job too. Obviously, there was a lot of writers that were taken out by the job, but I say, and it also kind of does create a gap, right, between the people who can write really well, because AI is still rather emotionless, and those people who couldn't write very well. Yes, you can pump out like all the things on blogs online and things like that to get keyword searches. Yep, it's a really good system, but if you want to emotionally resonate with somebody, whether it's a negotiation or a cold email, going out that everybody gets and we all hate getting them, right? Is the idea that it can be more efficient. And to your point, I don't think they've seen the efficiency in AI with email. I think they've seen it in other areas in sales. But when you get into AI in healthcare, higher education, government, auto manufacturing, AI has been here for a long time. I think we forget to not remember 10 years ago when AI was controlling a lot of things already. When Google was auto-populating cells for us and going, oh, well, that's AI. That's just a very low-grade version of what we saw eventually, is sort of this predictability. And to your point, I love that. And where I think about it, two areas of negotiating is, one area is prep. What are the personalities of the people that we're going to be dealing with, and what are their tendencies? Because you can walk into a room and sort of pre-plan for that within about 10% error rate, because I think that tech has gotten really good. And then also to your point, Dave, the number crunching, right? So if I'm a rep and I really wanted to do it, I could literally just feed it into something as simple as ChatGPT and says, if they do this, what would mine do if I wanted to stay under this? Well, here's some creative ideas, right? Do a 36-month contract, include a services rider, look to waive the down fee and extend from 24 months to 36 months, whatever those are. I think it's not out of the realm of possibilities that a lot of people have good playbooks for sales. What they maybe haven't included in there, and I was sitting with Chris Orlob last week at SaaStr, talking about the very topic. He said, I don't have a really good negotiation training module. I can negotiate really well, but it's not something I train. And so obviously we had a discussion about that, but I said, yeah, I didn't really get a lot of good training on negotiations. The best training I had was at AT&T, because we were selling to enterprise companies. So we needed to understand these are $14, $20 million quotas, like big spends, where a cent on long distance in 2004 times 17 million minutes a month is a lot of cents. And so looking at that math, and when we were on calculators still and Excel spreadsheets, like doing that. I really gained a lot from that. And I think that sellers have so many opportunities, right? I mean, we attract customers, retain customers, negotiate better. At the end of the day, there's no end in sight, but I think it's the one thing that we all want to get better at because it means more money in our pocket, but it also means a better relationship if done well with the customer who's about to come on board. So a bad negotiation is always going to leave a sour taste in the mouth. Um, Dave, do you have anything in closing in terms of a time that you could, before we're going to learn a little bit about you too, a time that you could wish you could redo a negotiation that comes to mind? And I save this question, I don't let anybody know because then they get this great story. And this is the best answer. What negotiation do you wish you could redo and why?
Yeah, there's one that comes to mind. If anyone from my company listens to this, they'll know who I'm talking about. And actually, like, I wasn't a big fan of the approach for my counterparts, but like kudos to them for being aggressive, and like, they definitely caught me off guard on this one. And we just had a really difficult customer, decided to reevaluate the technology, look at competitors, did a whole big, like, I mean, the evaluation was like 18 months, and it was different counterparts in every region across the globe. And I was like getting up in the middle of the night and doing demos for people. And they had a very aggressive procurement team based in Europe. We were actually at another account for an in-person meeting that was also very high stakes. And the procurement team was in Europe. And we got an email at about like 7 a.m. in the morning. And it was early mid-July, late July. And they said, hey, we were in the process of finalizing the decision this week. As you know, we go on vacation for August. Julie is out of the office tomorrow. I'm out of the office, like, a week from now. And we need a decision and feedback on like your final number, like today. And your competitor just dropped their rate, like, to X, and it was a significant difference in price. We didn't drop it to anywhere near, what the competition did, but we dropped it to further to a lower number than we would have otherwise. And we're quite stressed in that moment. Come to find out, one of the things I talk about, not in negotiation, just in general, is the value and importance of having champions, people that you can back channel, tell you what will happen. And I learned subsequently that the decision had already been made, and that they were going forward with us no matter what we came back with on that final number. And that was a pure negotiation tactic on the day of, from that person. So I think that there's just a lot going on that day. We've been working that so long, and I just really, I knew we just needed the deal at the end of the day. And so we got it. I just wish that I had like leveraged, my champions more, slowed it down, explained this didn't make sense. That's your timeline. It's not my timeline. Like, I can't make a decision in that time frame. It's not reasonable. So I don't really let people rush me. That's a huge tactic in negotiation, is timing and surprises. And I do think that like people can really impact the sentiment and relationship when they're being disingenuous. Like maybe if they just had a nice conversation with me, I maybe would have done the same thing, right? Yeah, I think too, to mitigate that in the future, I always try to talk about like the importance of reverse engineering the milestones and timeline. When do you need a decision? Why do you need a decision by then? What are all the pieces that need to come and play in the meantime? When do those pieces need to start based on how long they run? Are there additional dependencies that need to get done before or after? And then let's write all that out and email it and confirm written that that's the timeline and those are the things that we're doing, so that I don't have any surprises, and I'm working toward you getting this information and you getting your decision when you need it, and that we're not getting, having something sprung last second.
That sounds like a really, I hate to say adrenaline because it's like you don't want to admit that, but like adrenaline, right? Like lots of like it's the big deal. You find out you would have won it anyways. You wish you would have had the champion, like all the things we wish we could accelerate in our knowledge base. And even in the moment, sometimes like you're on the main stage, like you aren't the owner of your company. Like you have a board that is looking at this decision and judging you and your future based off of it. And so think it's hard for people to wrap around who aren't in that moment, and that's okay because you are in that moment. So you're in the game now. You're teaching the game, Dave. Where do people find you and learn more about what you do? If they heard something that they like during this podcast, you're gonna be all over YouTube and the airwaves. You'll be famous before you know it, Dave.
Oh boy, I don't know if I'm ready for that. um, I would just follow me on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. I'm really active on there. I occasionally like to write like really authentic content and just ideas. I don't just post like, here's a new product feature. And also, I've done a few podcasts, like I mentioned to you when we were, warming up before we started the recording. Things like this, I'll share there. So if you found value in this and you want to engage and talk about some of these topics, just follow me on LinkedIn. Yeah, and if you're really interested, send me a message and say hello. I love to meet new people and be thrilled to hear from anyone that may listen to this.
Dave, I think you just opened Pandora's box to every sales rep who thinks they might be able to sell you something. So you can always suss out the real ones from the people who are automated on LinkedIn. But thank you so much for spending some time. I think it was great just to traverse your career, learn about perception and reality, reality in your world. Dave, thanks for inviting us under the hood into the company. I learned a lot about what Osso does today, which is why we reached out to you, is because we're looking for interesting leaders and interesting companies who are seemingly at the top of their game. You absolutely lived up to that hype and then some, Dave. So thank you for being on Maker Connect. My name is Steve Schmidt. You'll find this episode everywhere from YouTube, obviously segments on LinkedIn where we like to keep that home base, and then as well as on audio at Apple and, oh my gosh, what's the other one? The big one. Help me out here. Spotify. Oh my gosh. I think I might be an investor too on my little phone app. So Dave, thanks so much. Have a great day, my friend. Thanks for being on Maker Connect.